Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down with women experts from all walks of life to discuss the ideas, opportunities, and the strategies that women can take advantage of to get ahead in our patriarchal society. So, if one of your love languages is learning how to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. Hi, listeners. Today I'm sitting down with Emily Merrell, founder and business coach at Second Degree Society, co-founder of Ready, Set, Coach, and podcast host of the Second Degree and Ready, Set, Coach podcast. Emily is also lovingly called 20 Questions by those who know her, and to those who come to know who she is, they quickly understand why. After a 9-month post-college stint in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Emily launched her career in the fashion world working in special events and marketing for high luxury brands Ralph Lauren, Tory Burch, and Intermix. Since her leap into entrepreneurship in 2016, Emily's expertise in community building, networking, and business coaching has been applauded and featured by Refinery29, Brit & Co., Girl Boss, Forbes, Create and Cultivate, and the Huffington Post. She's a recent Denver transplant from San Francisco and New York City. In her spare time, you can find her playing with her son Jackson, playing the name game, exploring her human design, she's a projector by the way, hiking with her husband Greg, and planning her next taco night. Let's come together and offer Emily a very warm welcome. I am so excited to welcome Emily to our conversation today. We're going to dive into the challenges in entrepreneurship, especially the ones unspoken. So the ones you learn when you're in it, and they can be very different for women. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. And what challenges are you talking about? It's all roses and ladies who lunch with entrepreneurship.
It is. It's the most beautiful experience. It's what, 15-hour work weeks at your own pace.
Totally. I feel like it's like childbirth. Like you don't talk about it until you're in it. And then you can tell people the secrets of entrepreneurship once they've decided to make that choice to be on the other side.
That was such a good analogy because it's so true. It's a lot like parenting that nobody tells you beforehand. And they tell you after it's happened, you're like, we got that. Nobody tells you in advance.
Yeah, they're like laughing at you. They're like, haha, you learned. So you got vomit on you too. Yep. Or all of the fun things that come. But I think it is a good parallel in terms of entrepreneurship on social media is painted like a reality show of sorts, where it looks very glamorous and it looks you're traveling the world and you're having lunches with your boss babes and you're, building the schedule of your dreams. And yet what they don't see is, to your point, the behind the scenes of working from 5 till midnight and then balancing everything else in addition to their business and having to figure out how to run a business when that's what they've never done in their entire lives.
Yeah. One reason I'm super excited to have you on the show is that you're pretty vocal about your challenges on social media. And I think that transparency juxtapositioned against the glamour is so needed.
I hope I glamorously display the challenges. But yes, no, I like to be honest. And truthfully, I started my business coaching just because I made so many mistakes and I went down so many wrong paths of this maze of entrepreneurship that I don't want other people to spend as much money or time or energy falling as much as I did.
I love that. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about those? I think it's important. I think it'll connect.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And
yeah. I'll start with challenge number 1 was living in New York City and not talking to both an accountant and a lawyer at the same exact time when filing to register my business. I registered in New York City as an LLC. Then I got an accountant who was like, actually, you should be in Connecticut as a C Corp. So I'm pretty sure, I think somewhere out there, my LLC might still be hanging out in New York. And so then registered in Connecticut. And then I moved states and opening up a franchise account when I moved to California because certain states require different things. And then switching the name of a business and then starting all over again. So I think the biggest lesson there was just sitting and giving it more time in terms of talking to both an accountant and a lawyer and weighing my options for what I really needed. Because when I started, I just felt such anxiety of having that security of an LLC. I didn't really know, I didn't really think about tax ramifications beyond that. So that's one. Number two, and I like to talk about this one, especially as a entrepreneur who is self-funded, and this was in 2016. I remember having a conversation with a lawyer about trademarking, but trademarking at this point in my entrepreneurial journey, it was super expensive and super prohibitive. And there are so many incredible, especially female lawyers out there that make the process a lot more digestible and a lot easier for you to make a decision on and a lot more like cost efficient. And I ultimately decided not to trademark my business, which at the time was called 6 Degrees Society. And that bit me in the butt big time when in 2019, I got a cease and desist letter from from another organization with a comparable name. And I ended up embarking in a licensing agreement for several years after that point until I got my wits together and I got my business together and everything together to ultimately change the name. So those were two massive mistakes or obstacles that I had to navigate and I had to figure out and ride the wave on.
Those are always two big ones. I tell people all the time, three people you hire, no matter what, is a lawyer, an accountant, and usually someone to handle HR when you're going down that route of hiring. Don't try to take those three things on yourself.
Yeah. I'd also add a bookkeeper too. And I completely forgot. I tried to do my books the first year and I was like, this isn't hard, but I had so much resistance to do it. And so what should have taken me 2 hours took me like 20 hours. So ultimately, I've since outsourced just the bookkeeping of QuickBooks. It's just not my jam, not my strength. But yeah, those are probably, there's so many other mistakes that have happened along the way, but those are some of my favorites.
Thank you for sharing it. It brings up like when I'm advising founders that are looking to scale, I point out the same thing. Look at it as this is my billable rate. And if I'm spending 8 hours doing it and I could pay someone less to do it quicker, how much money does it save me? Outsource that thing because you are now hitting your bottom line by trying to do it yourself.
And you're 1,000%. And I got on the VA bandwagon pretty fast. But what I found with the VA, I wouldn't micromanage. I would fix the problem rather than tell the person what the problem was. So if you were my VA, Raven, and you gave me a Canva with the name Emilio instead of Emily, instead of me telling you that it was spelled wrong, I would just change it. And so then I wasn't teaching her. I was putting more work on my plate. And so that was an obstacle I had to navigate for years, was just figuring out how to find the backbone to give feedback and to also, just because I can do it faster doesn't mean I should be doing it, and letting that person do their job and let them know why I didn't like that version or how it can be improved and when I need it back from them.
Such a good point. It's that whole, what is it? Teach a person to fish kind of thing.
Totally.
It's that same analogy.
Instead fish for them. Yeah, 1,000%. Or I could fish for them, but I'm like, why am I fishing for them when I'm also paying them to fish for me?
Yeah. Let's dive into a little bit of the gender dynamics because, of course, it is hacking the patriarchy. And I imagine that obstacles that men and women face in entrepreneurship can be quite different. Probably a lot of them overlap. They are similar, but there are probably some differences. Can you talk through what you've experienced, what you've seen in regards to that?
Yeah. So I'll share a little background. I started my entrepreneurial journey as a side hustle in 2014. And so at that time, I was really exposed to the entrepreneurs that I was exposed to. I worked at Tory Burch. And so the Tory Burch had the Tory Burch Foundation. So it was really cool seeing the resources that entrepreneurial women were receiving. And at that point, she was giving, I want to say like 5K grants to women. I thought 5K was like the most money in the entire world too. And so that was my first kind of experience of seeing people asking for money of other people. And then some other resources that were pointed in my direction when it came to my I left my corporate job in 2016 and decided to bet on myself. I'd done no fundraising. I'm someone who I don't like to ask a lot of other people, which is another obstacle that as a woman, I need to get over myself on, but I don't like to be beholden to other people. I admired men who could just go out there and be like, yeah, I need $2 million, but I don't have a product and I just have this idea and you need to give me $2 million to make it happen. Versus what you saw with these women who had all of the product built out, all of the record behind them of the traction, and yet weren't getting the $2 million. They were getting the $200,000 or the $5,000 grants. They just were definitely lacking in what they were receiving. I was always so intimidated by the fundraising process. And I never wanted to be beholden to anyone and have someone tell me that I needed to exit or grow at a certain pace. So I liked exploring the different resources that were more like female optimized or focused. So I Fund Women was another thing, which was like the Kickstarter for women. It's a funding platform. And it's just funny just thinking of the dynamics in terms of what was available for women, which is available for both men and women, but I'll say mostly men. The ones that were available for women were a little softer, were a little not as audacious in their goals. I Fund Women, you could raise $5,000 and it was no big deal versus Kickstarter, you better have $100,000 goal to get it. So just seeing the masculine and feminine dynamic there. And then I'd also share, I think my male friends who were founders, the conversations they were having were typically focused on scaling and fundraising, where I didn't notice that as often amongst females. It was more like surviving, not fundraising.
Yeah, you definitely see that. And I feel like the ask for women is very different usually. But then as they raise and they learn, I just had this conversation the other day about how it does change. Like the actual approach might be a little different, but it does change. Speaking of challenges and the difference in obstacles and challenges for women versus men, being a woman comes with even more, because even though it might not be the case, it does feel like there's this unspoken pressure to do way more, to maintain the household and be with your children. I know that's a big one. Be present. Do you have any thoughts on that? And even more, because I think that our listeners, being entrepreneurs and being women, are probably going to have experienced some, even if they're not mothers, some sort of bias there or obstacle that is related to that. How you have overcome those challenges and how you might recommend they do.
Yeah. So 2019 was, I like to call it my dumpster fire year. It was like the year of dumpster fire, love, loss, and a lot of shit in between. And it was the year we got married, so it was wonderful in that regard. But we also had an apartment fire and we lost pretty much all of our belongings. And my husband, he was commuting to Palo Alto. So he was driving an hour every single day each way to get to his office. And so he had just started his new job the week before the fire had happened. So it wasn't something like he could take an extended time period off to deal with this. All of it fell on my shoulders, from finding us a new apartment to going back to our old place and going through like our charred belongings and categorizing what is what and what the value is and submitting claims to insurance. And then rebuilding our entire household. So that means like ordering all the furniture and waiting for the furniture to arrive and coordinating the furniture deliveries while also running my business and trying to show up for my clients and showing up for my events and planning a wedding simultaneously at the same time. It was an unspoken thing that, Emily, you have more flexibility, that this obviously makes sense for you to tackle. And you're an entrepreneur. So like your salary matters, but not as much. And so that's like a punch in the gut when you feel that feeling. And while it's not directly said at you, that's what's felt. And it truly became like a third full-time job in addition to planning the wedding, running my business, was just navigating this really dark period of time. Oh, and this was the time, the same week So that happened May. And then in June, I got the cease and desist letter from the
Oh,
trademark company. Yeah. It was just like everything kept happening one after the other, and all of these things. And the year culminated with our wedding getting evacuated and us having to deal with wedding insurance because we didn't get married at that venue and all of that fun stuff. But I was like, I'm not a religious person, but what is testing me? What is this? What is happening that I feel like I'm just getting hit and hit, and I just wanted to cover my head and rock back and forth in a small ball. But I do think it is also a testament of just how powerful women are. And while this was just me, I know so many stories of other women who have dealt with things like this, where it's like, when in motion, stay in motion and roll with the punches and accept the punches and problem solve the punches versus the paralysis. And yeah, that's just a personal. And then I'll elaborate. I'm now a mom. I have a 2.5-year-old. And there's definitely this aspect, and we're so lucky. We both work from home now. But there is this aspect where I do travel a good deal more for my job. And my husband will, of course, get like a sick child. And he is a hero. He is praised as a hero at work for, oh my God, your wife left and now you're stuck with a sick kid. Yeah. Yeah, I would have been stuck with the sick kid if he wasn't there. So it is fascinating to see those dynamics unravel.
Oh, you bring up so many points I want to dive into. I want to highlight that because that was your statement: when in motion, stay in motion. I've never heard that, and I think it's brilliant.
Kind of mantra in life.
Yeah, which was like that part of the conversation is the perfect dovetail into mental health, which is a huge part of entrepreneurship. I do also want to dive into the differences in perceived, I'm trying to find the word, like the whole like perceived value. Yeah, that's it. That's a good one. But I want to dive into mental health first. And that's a lot to take on in a year. How do you feel you manage your mental health at that time? And would you do it differently now?
So at that time, so the fire happened May 6th, I believe, May 6th, 2019. And it was like one of the more traumatic experiences of my entire life, just surviving a fire. And it's also an incredible thing when you tell the world you've had a fire, how many people have experienced that sort of trauma. And you should see me around candles or around the stove on. I'm like, oh, you left the stove on. Did you want it on still? I'm turning stoves off. I'm turning candles off. I'm just very cognizant and very hyper aware. And I quickly, that was May. I think the next week I found a therapist because I did not want to feel resentment to anyone. I didn't want to the fight and flight in me is both are so strong that I think part of my brain was like, maybe this is a sign I shouldn't get married and I should move home with my family in Connecticut and I should just be a stay-at-home daughter and burn my life to the ground basically and just leave this relationship and walk out of it. Like fear of the unknown and going through a challenge. And luckily, the more rational part of my brain was able to push through and was able to seek out guidance. And I was so grateful to have this therapist because she helped me so much during also the wedding fire and things that happened at that point. She was helping me navigate all of these things. So would I do it differently in terms of mental health? No. What I would probably have done differently, and I had incredible friends at this moment in time who would spend their weekends helping me go through my stuff and feed me lots of pastries to make my spirits a little bit better. But I probably would have even asked for more help than I did. I think people offered help, but I think I could have done a lot more and accomplished more in a shorter period of time if I had asked for even more help. But back to the inconveniencing feeling. I didn't want to inconvenience anyone. I didn't want to ruin someone's weekend sorting through a dirty, charred underwear drawer. I think I probably would have asked for more support, hands-on, tactical support.
Asking for help is not easy for a lot of people, which is funny because it's probably even harder. It has the stigma that it's harder for men. So again, in that conversation of entrepreneurship, I wonder, What is that like for the male entrepreneurs out there?
I will have to say I was proud of my husband. He grabbed a therapist pretty much the same week I did, immediately afterwards. And I was grateful. And I didn't tell him to do it. He did it. And that was a relief. This is a trauma we both went through. Like, you need to deal with it. And I can't be your therapist for the trauma.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's probably, I wonder if that was difficult for him, but we're not going to dive into that. That's a conversation offline for another day. Let's dive a little more into one of your bread and butter topics that I think is imperative to this conversation, which is around network and having that support and the network for the challenges. I want to look at your background in that and the benefits of having that network when encountering entrepreneurial challenges, but also how you might have seen that be different for men and women. I feel like women tend to network different. I've had a conversation last season about networking, and no matter what, women network differently, but how to use that to your benefit. And I just throw so many questions at you. So let's start with what you think is, first of all, your background in networking and what you think is important to take away from that when you're challenged as an entrepreneur.
So my approach with networking really starts in kindergarten, pretty much. I got in trouble in kindergarten because I had to hug every single person goodbye before I left for the day.
That's the cutest thing.
Yeah, I know. Which they were probably like, who is this like weirdo, this Care Bear? I just loved people. I've always loved people. I've always had just this curiosity about people. Like, I just shared with you some of my hardships and just like a snapshot of them. But then you hear about other people's hardships or other things that people overcame, or stories of their parents and coming to this country, or how they met their love, or all of the things. And I think we have so much to learn from other people if we give ourselves the time to ask intentional questions of them. So I think the biggest place to start with networking is curiosity, is approaching it with a place of open-mindedness and curiosity, and not a place of taking, like not a place of, oh, what am I going to get out of this conversation or of this event that I'm going to, but rather, ooh, what am I going to get out of this conversation and this event with this unknown? I like to think about networking a lot like a blank chapter book, where how a connection, like take us, for example, like we met at Alt Summit, and us meeting for 30 minutes, we've now interacted like 3 more times, and how our worlds have intertwined that much more. And I think that's a really cool experience of open-mindedness. If you don't have an expectation, you can let the path unwind how it's supposed to. So networking, I really love to approach like friend first and giving first. Again, be curious, ask questions, but also I feel like whenever I have something that I can offer, I love to be generous. It makes me feel good. It makes me then like usually get involved in their life in some capacity and continue the network forward. And then my mantra for networking is build your network when you're not looking for anything, and then you can tap it when you are. So even with the example of the fire, I belonged to a community space at that time, a co-working space. And like the networking, everyone in the community came together and bought me like a Rent the Runway gift card. And another woman owned this beautiful cashmere company. Their cashmere was like $400 a piece. And she gave me like 5 pieces of cashmere and 3 pieces of her silk shirts. And just people came together. And this was without me asking. They just did it because I had sent her introductions to the right people. Like I had continued pouring into all of these cups. And so when the time came that my cup was very empty, needed to be poured into, I think people didn't feel beholden to do it. They did it because they wanted to do it. That was a very roundabout way to say, I think friendship, curiosity, and open-mindedness are great ways to approach networking.
I love that because I'm not a man, so I don't know if I'm not. I don't know if it is different for them in that approach. I have to imagine that for some it is. I do know that even having conversations in networking atmospheres the approach in conversations with women and men is usually very different anyway. So I love that. I love approaching it from the softness and a place of giving and a place of curiosity and learning.
I can also add, I think one of the things that I do, so many people feel like they hear the word networking and it has to be confined to a space focused on networking. It has to be a networking event to be networked. And that's not true at all. I've met friends or business partners or all of these things in the most random places, from falling down the stairs at the subway to at a bar to on a plane. And every single opportunity is a networking opportunity if you pose it that way. But because networking has such a gross stigma around it, rather it's like just this friendship building opportunity. Like everywhere you go, you can make a friend. And I think the biggest challenge is the follow up and the follow through. And so one of my favorite hacks with that is Instagram's made it really easy too, where you can send someone a DM or you can send them or be like, hey, what's your Instagram? I want to send you the recommendation we were talking about. But I also like to make a plan in real life. And I usually like to do something based on what I like to do. So I love morning workouts. And so I usually force the place that I work out to give me a free code so I can invite people as my guest, because then I'm bringing someone free to their space to try their workout. And then it makes it really easy for the person to say yes and to join me at this experience. And then there's usually a coffee shop nearby. So I'm like, why don't we go for like an 8:30 a.m. workout and then we can grab a coffee and I can learn more about your work on the Golden Retriever Rescue Farm. And go from there. And so then it's easy and it takes the pressure of it being like a formal business meeting where I have to come prepared to pitch myself to this person. And you can see this person in the morning as a human. And it usually makes them that much more willing to work with you because you're building a friendship. It's easier then for them to vouch for you later on.
That's really good advice. It was absolutely brilliant. I've seen startup groups that do like group hikes to get to know each other and stuff. But even like a walk-in strategy sessions, they offer 50% off their services. They only offer it once a day. But that hour that the provider is walking is half off because it gets them out to exercise. It was just brilliant.
That's a brilliant. No, I think exercise and movement in early morning always feel the best for me, also because at least in California, I have so many East Coast clients and events and whatnot. My anxiety would start picking up pretty early. Like I would be getting emails at 6 a.m. And so if I did things early in the morning, I could be more focused without being like, oh my God, I have so many emails that I need to respond to. I'm feeling behind schedule on things. I could really be present with that person that I was connecting with at that time.
Brilliant. All right, we are going to start wrapping it up, but I have so many things I want to talk about, and we'll just squeeze a little bit more out of this conversation. Going back to the challenges and different from men and women. You run a society, literally a women's group. So I am sure we've heard so much about your story. I'm sure you have seen other obstacles women face and how they might approach it different than men, or just in general, how they approach it. Without giving anyone away, is there anything you can share about what you've seen for others?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I've seen everything from fertility, where people are navigating like their fertility journey and finding resources amongst each other. Maybe there's a fertility health coach, or they go to this acupuncturist who's focused on fertility. And that's been really cool to see. I think I've seen divorce before, like when shitty things have happened, and then the community being able to help them navigate what to do next. I've seen businesses start. I've seen businesses sold. What have I not seen, basically? A lot of moves. I think the coolest thing I've seen, and this is to bring it back to my organization, is this aspect of I've seen a lot of people move. Like maybe they're moving for love, maybe they're moving for a job, maybe they're moving for a new opportunity. And when they move to a city, and at the time before pandemic, I had 10 markets across the country. So I was executing in real life events, at least monthly, in 10 communities in 10 cities. And at that point, and now we're mostly virtual with the exception of hosting events in New York, LA, and Denver. And it was really cool to see people make the move to a city. And then I'd get a message. I'd see them sign up for an event and I'd get a message and it'd be like, it felt like coming home. I was so overwhelmed about where to start. I was so overwhelmed of how to make friends. And then I remembered this organization and how it made me feel in New York. So I joined in LA and it felt very comparable. And so I think there's this aspect, doesn't matter what life stage you are at, it's just this, you need a place that can make you feel like home and without the judgment, you're going to be able to raise your hand and be like, I need help. And people will help you crowdsource solutions and get you off your butt and on your way.
Yeah, a move is a big one. But I think sometimes in entrepreneurship, you jump in and you do think, oh, I'm going to have way more flexibility. And no, actually, yes, there is flexibility, but you're going to work 2 times harder for that flexibility. Another huge one is I'm so good at this and I'm going to launch and people are just going to come in and you're like, oh no, you have to get really freaking good at selling. Like selling is going to be your number one job. And if that's not your bread and butter, get a coach. There are just so many challenges out there that again, I don't think people talk about. I don't hear a ton of people saying, oh God, you know what? It sucks that I'm a year in and I've had 2 clients because I didn't know sales or again, like the trademark thing, I feel like no one talks about the fact that you have this idea and you're like, I'm going to trademark it. No, you actually have to have 6 months to a year, something like that to actually use it. So if you trademark it and you're not even ready to use it, you're just going to lose it anyway. You're going to have spent all this money.
I'd say some of the other things, you're prompting some ideas. The other thing is paying yourself. So many people don't know how to pay themselves and they'll be like, oh yeah, I just have one credit card, my personal credit card and is my business credit card too. That drives me bonkers. And just thinking like they're not payrolling themselves or they're not paying the right taxes and they're really going to be hit with a big tax bill at the end. I think the other thing is the SEP IRA. Being able, you don't typically have a 401k when you have your own business, but how do you save for your future when you are a business owner? So talking with a financial advisor about getting like a SEP IRA. The other thing too, that the fire really woke this one up for me was like disability and life insurance and just thinking if something happened to me and I broke 2 arms tomorrow, could I run my business? And if not, what would happen? Like, how would I make income and how would I get income? The other thing is paid family leave is paying into paid family leave. So you can take that maternity leave and only certain states have it. So understanding what your state offers you versus also understanding what that maternity period would look like if you aren't paying into something like that. But I definitely think what you were saying about the sales, like how many people come in with this expectation. And I've had this a million times and I try not to work with these people because they bring me a lot of anxiety. But they're like, I need to replace my year salary in 3 months. And I'm going to give myself 3 months of figuring this out or I'm going to bail. And so the time allotment and being realistic of the time allotment. I don't think everyone should jump into entrepreneurship just completely blind. I think it should be a slow build, typically while having a corporate job. And then you can go in.
And I'm sure that the data has changed, but I remember when I jumped into entrepreneurship, the timeline was you're not going to be cash flow positive if you're not in 3 years. And to hear that, you're like, oh, I could be 3 years of not being cash flow positive. And a lot of people, they start out and they're like, okay, I have revenue and expenses, but what about the things in between? Or what about, Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say health insurance. That was it. Health insurance. If you were single and depending on what state you were in, but when I was in New York, I think I was under 30 and it was like $150 a month, but you had to payroll yourself. Basically, I had to pay myself like very little and be like below the poverty line to get the good insurance or like a better price on insurance. But the more you pay yourself, the more your insurance is going to cost too. And then also when you turn 30, then it like triples in price in specific states. And you're like, what the heck? And you're spending so much money on insurance, basically catastrophe insurance, hoping that you don't get hit by a truck tomorrow.
Another thing I had stumbled upon when I first started out as an entrepreneur that I don't think is spoken about is that there are actual unions. The one I think of is the Freelancers Union. It is out of California, but then they have so many members, you can get your insurance there at a much better price. Because it's a union. Yeah. But I don't know if they have them in every state. But no one told me about that. I was just like, oh my goodness, there's no way I can afford my insurance. I wish someone had advised me to pay myself so little that, like, where does it balance out? That's like, dive into those financials. Is my insurance costing as much as this? Like,
I think that's another back to the reality of entrepreneurship. You hear all these like multi 6-figure, 7-figure earners. But are they paying themselves 6 figures or 7 figures? Or is that what their business is earning? And maybe they're paying themselves like $50,000 so they don't have to be taxed as much. And so just there's so many more like tax ramifications or I think what's cool about having a business is a lot of your life can be run through your business carefully, but you also, this is why it's important to have a really solid tax professional or accountant to help you navigate these twists and turns, because it truly, I don't know if you feel this way, Raven, but it feels sometimes made up money and made up rules and everything in my business. I'm like, this is monopoly money in some capacity.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the tax person, because it's not anything like collecting a paycheck. It's a whole different ballgame. And I love the whole, you can expense it. And then I've had tax people be like, oh, you need to have more expenses. And you're just, what would you like me to spend it on?
Yeah. Again, that's where it feels fake. You're like, you want me to spend more money, but I'm trying to be good about my money. But if I don't spend more money, then I'm going to owe more money in taxes. What?
Yeah.
It's just it's a math equation I still don't quite understand.
And that is why you should not do that part yourself.
This is why. Math was not my strong suit. So that is it. Oh, and then I'll say the last thing too. I think it's so important. And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot do this diligently at the beginning and then completely forget about it. But just managing what's coming in and out of your business and understanding like how much money you're making month over month or projected revenue. So that way you can plan your cash flow accordingly and you can anticipate things. Like I always think about Shark Tank. I'm always so impressed by people on Shark Tank, like the way that they know their numbers, the way that they know their ROI, the way they know everything. Like every entrepreneur should get to that level, even for themselves.
Yeah. Actually, people are like, I'm not even tracking revenue and expenses properly. And then I'm like, so what about projections? They're like, I don't do that. And I'm like, oh,
what are you talking about? Yeah. You're like, thanks,
and I'm like,
thanks
okay, so you should like, let's do this year, let's do next year, then 3 years, then 5 years. And yeah, it might not all be right, but at least at the end of the year, I have no idea what happened and I don't even know how to plan for the next year.
Totally agree. And I think it's daunting. That's the hardest thing too, especially when you do a service-based business. You're like, how can I project what I'm making 3 years from now when I'm making it up month over month here?
Yeah. But if you have nothing else, start with a reasonable 2% increase this year, 3% increase that year, 5% increase that year. And yeah, again, you're throwing spaghetti at a wall, but it's better than not having a grasp on it at all. And if you're into manifesting, then you're at least putting the numbers out there in the universe. I'm going to get that. That's at least my minimum.
You've got some benchmark numbers to aim for. I love it. Exactly. I agree.
All right, let's wrap this up. I love to wrap up every show with the top 3 hacks. I'm sure you already gave more than 3 hacks, but if you're throwing out the top 3, what are they?
Oh gosh, top 3 hacks. Batch. I would recommend batching as much as you can in your life. So what that means is like sitting down maybe for a week, maybe for a day, depends on how fast you work, but batching out your social media, inclusive of Instagram and LinkedIn, batching out your newsletters as much as you can, out any like graphics you're creating, but really working hard for that one day or 1 week so that you don't have to work that hard for the month or the quarter or the year, depending how far you batch. So that's my first one. I'm a batching queen. Number 2 is go to bed by 9:30 and wake up at 5. 5 a.m. is the best time in the entire day. I get so many people being like, you're insane. I can't believe you wake up that early. But There's a great book called The 5 a.m. Club, and being up at 5 a.m., not only do you get this concentrated time for you, especially if you are beholden to a lot of other people and have littles or have a partner and a dog, but the 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. time is like the most magical moment and area of my day. I accomplish usually the hardest thing that I need to do. I read a book, I journal, I relax. Like it's wonderful. And I challenge you to do that. And then the last thing, hack-wise, is if you are looking at your computer and you're spiraling, I encourage you to close it and get outside, because so often we forget to move our bodies and to touch grass, as the youth say, and just be in a different environment and then come back to it. And you probably will have more clarity.
I love that. And you know what I love about it? Is that those were 3 hacks you didn't previously cover in the conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like those should almost be like known, like innate, but they're not. And those are things no one throws out. Like, like sage business advice, batch up early, touch grass, get outside, touch grass.
Get outside, touch grass. Just breathe air that is not circulated in your home and you'll feel better. And drink water.
I love it.
Lots of it.
Yep. Yeah. I get bad at that. I sit at my desk and I have my coffee and I have my water, but I forget that it exists. And then all of a sudden noon comes and I'm like, oh my goodness, I haven't had any water today.
Yeah. Yeah. You typically, if I'm feeling this way, or I'll take power naps. That's the other hack too. If you're feeling flustered, just giving yourself a 15-minute power nap. I usually can reset myself and then sit back and do the thing I needed to do for some reason.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever do that, because I'm that person that even that little tiny nap just throws my whole world on. I'm the same way about like sleeping in. If I sleep in too late, like whole day's off. Like whole day is completely off. This has been an amazing conversation. For those tuning in who want to get to know you better, want to reach out, want to join your community, get involved, how do they find you?
Check us out at Second Degree Society, all spelled out.com. And also come find me on Instagram. I respond and hang out on DMs. My Instagram name is Emily A. Merrell, like the shoes, not the financial institution.
I will put all of that in the show notes. Emily, it has been my greatest pleasure, and I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to be a guest on your show.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends. If you've made it this far, I have one more little thing to share with you. Did you know that this isn't my only feminist endeavor? That's right, there's more. I run a media startup dedicated to providing the most current and pertinent news about women, for women, and by women. Our mission centers on delivering a platform where the latest updates regarding women-led initiatives are extensively covered, highlighting women's actions, accomplishments, perspectives, and other elements that profoundly influence women's lives and contribute to meaningful progress. I invite you to head over to femled.news to learn more.